Hello again, and thank you for staying with us. We continue here. The Healthy Living Alliance has produced a series focusing on the rights that consumers have to nutritious food. Now, the series divises into some of the strategies used by big corporations that also prioritize profit over people's health. For a discussion on this, we are now joined by Dr. Petronell Kruger, who's the Programs Manager at Healthy Living Alliance. A pleasure to have you on the program, Petronell. Can you explain the main objectives of this Chew for this series, or what HELA aims to achieve with it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having HELA on your program. And effectively what Chew on this is aiming to achieve is reaching out to the public and explaining to the people of South Africa, firstly, what it means to have a constitutionally protected right to sufficient and adequate food. And secondly, to show those same members of the public what is standing in our way of ensuring that every South African achieves that right. And in short, it means having enough healthy food so that we can all live a dignified life. Something that's very important in a country where 12% of households say that they've experienced malnutrition or food insecurity within the last year, and where 70% of women and 12% of children are suffering from overweight and obesity.
Let's get into that. How do added sugars and other unhealthy ingredients in processed foods, how do they conflict with the World Health Organization guidelines here?
That's a fantastic question. So non-communicable diseases are oftentimes spurred by diet-related risk factors, which can lead to overweight and obesity. So things like having too much sugar in your food can oftentimes lead to increased diabetes. Too much salt is oftentimes linked with hypertension. And we're seeing really high rates of cancer. So the World Health Organization and our Department of Health and experts worldwide have indicated that these, what we call nutrients of concern, so sugar, salts, and all of these industrial additives, need to be limited so that people can have healthy lives. Right now, 1 in 2 South Africans are dying from non-communicable diseases, and about a quarter of that's directly linked to health. So we see people in South Africa, 1 in 9 adults having diabetes, cardiovascular disease, lung diseases being very prevalent. And what we know is that we need to eat less than 50 grams of sugar a day, but actually, ideally, we're saying 25 grams of sugar or less. We should be restricting the amount of artificial sweetener we ingest, and we shouldn't be adding salts to our food. But unfortunately, the moment we buy food, especially packaged food in the shops, those little things are snuck into our foods, and everyday South Africans simply don't know we're eating these nutrients of concern.
Yeah. But what role does government regulation play in addressing the negative impacts or effects of ultra-processed foods? And what changes are needed, in your opinion?
So government has a very important role. So government, being sort of the steward of the type of information we receive, needs to ensure that there's restrictions on what can be placed in foods or what kind of health claims that ultra-processed food producers can put on foods, and also to ensure that we have access to information. So I spoke to the right to adequate food, but we also have the right to have our personal information protected, but to easily access information. So government's been doing a fairly good job under the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act of placing regulations on what needs to be disclosed on packaged goods, and having some of the world's best sodium restrictions, which was really the first of that type of restriction we had on the African continent. But it needs to go one step further, and we're slightly behind with other countries because it's really difficult to read the back of packaged foods. I mean, anyone who's ever purchased the good knows it's in tiny font. You don't really understand,
Right.
what does it mean to have 0.006 milligrams of sodium? It's really difficult to interpret. So the new movement, and also endorsed by the World Health Organization and really pioneered in Latin America, is what we call a front of pack warning label, which is effectively that nutritionists, and we have that now in South Africa, nutritionists would sit down, they would develop a model to indicate whether or not foods have too much of these problematic nutrients. And if a packaged good then does have too much of those goods, a triangle will appear on the front of the pack, at a good visibility so that consumers can read it and indicate, beware, this might contain too much salt, sugar, or artificial sweeteners included. And currently we have a draft regulation, R337 from the Department of Health, which will bring us in line with international best practice on this. And we hope to see some movement on that regulation within the next year.
Right. But can you discuss the potential impact of maybe health taxes and other policy interventions, especially on consumer access to nutritious food here?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. And, you're raising health taxes. And one of the main sort of taxes that we're seeing is the so-called sugar tax or the health promotion levy, which is effectively, it works like an excise tax or what you would see on cigarettes and alcohol. And it's taxed on added sugar in drinks. And that raises about 3 billion rands in government revenue, which is a massive revenue stream. But more importantly, a health tax like that has been proven in South Africa to cause reformulation, which is effectively where food producers realize they're adding too much of this product or nutrient, so they remove that or reduce it, which is very good for public health.
Yeah.
And also changes consumer practices. So something like sugary drinks, I mean, no one needs to drink a sugary drink. We should all be drinking water. So that's had really positive impact on consumer behavior. And we've seen studies from South Africa, but really worldwide, that indicates that those types of taxes work. But ideally speaking, we need to move beyond that, and we need to ensure that we add a whole range of products. I mean, we can't just be taxing sugary drinks and think that we're going to be changing South African diets, especially given how, wide the problem is, and overweight and obesity is increasing. And we should be very worried because we haven't seen a country in the world that's seen a reduction in overweight and obesity. So right now it seems like if you're on the train, it's only going forward, which is very worrying. So we need to have very serious interventions right now. And I mean, there are some simple things that the government can also do in terms of those additional health taxes, which is to include other goods with added sugar within the scope of the current tax. So fruit juices are currently excluded, and I think there's sort of a misnomer, especially from families and parents, to think that fruit juice is healthy, but it actually contains incredible amounts of sugar. There's a reason they say we should eat our fruits, not drink it, because, one little fruit juice can contain the equivalent of 7 apples, doesn't have the fiber in it that we need to actually digest that sugar, and it contains a lot of calories. And something like extending the health promotion levy to include those categories of goods will help consumers purchase less of it, but it also has what we call a health signifying effect. If you see this product is taxed, you ask yourself, why is this product taxed? And why is it taxed the same way that we tax alcohol and tobacco? And that's because it is supposed to have that same health signifying effect. Sugar is as addictive as tobacco, and it's important for us to understand that as the public.
Yeah, but how does the rising cost of food also contribute to dietary choices that favor unhealthy options?
I think that's such a fantastic question. And unfortunately, I don't have a great answer in the sense that, in the sense that ultra-processed foods are cheaper.
Right,
and I think the Healthy Living Alliance, we want to make it clear that we are aware, South Africans are not electing to eat these ultra-processed products that contain little nutrients because South Africans don't care about their health. We're very much aware that it's a systemic issue, and that, if you're going to work 12 hours a day and have a 3-hour commute, you don't have electricity at home, you're struggling to access a grocery store, it makes complete sense that you would purchase a packaged good that you can quickly eat on the way home or that you can pack for your child in their lunchbox. So there does need to be systemic intervention as well. So, awareness of packaged goods is fantastic. Health taxation is fantastic. But we also need to think about having a larger demand from government to ensure that we have access to healthy goods.
Right.
And that happens in all kinds of ways. So ensuring that there's grocery stores in all areas, not just rich areas, ensuring that we subsidize local food producers and that we subsidize prioritize healthy foods, and that we don't have these companies coming in from the US and Europe undermining farm gate prices for our local producers, so that we can actually protect our South African producers, because we're a major food producing country, but we're simply not seeing our own healthy goods being circulated.
Right. I actually want us to crystallize that point. What can be done to support local food producers, but also ensure their products are more accessible and affordable?
I mean, that's a very good question. I think the very first step would be to actually reduce the demand of ultra-processed goods. We've spoken about it a lot, but just think about it as things that come in packages and that you don't know what's being included. It's simply that the market is flooded with those goods. So we see that local food producers don't have the same demand, because we're having these companies come in and advertise in schools and, changing consumer behavior from an early age. And when you go on a park run, you'll see that certain soda companies would, provide their goods. And when you go to a petrol station, you're really only going to see 7 to 8 brands being sold there. And that's because there's this artificial demand that's created through marketing, which local producers, if you're going to compare to a big company like Coca-Cola and you're a local producer of a product in KwaZulu-Natal, you simply can't compete, because it's a marketing behemoth. So we need to actually start thinking about restrictions on these types of goods being marketed, because overall unhealthy goods are usually imported, and the things that make them unhealthy is added to the product so that they have a long shelf life, and as they ship, they don't grow old or stale or become dangerous while in transport. So if we can market or restrict marketing of goods specifically with added preservatives and salts, we're going to go a long way in actually protecting local South African producers who don't have to put all of those preservatives in their goods, because they produce it and they sell it the next day. And there's really no need for these industrial additives to ensure that those goods are safe and still viable.
Dr. Kruger, as we start wrapping up our conversation, how can communities and individuals advocate for better food policies and practices in this country?
That's a fantastic question. And I think it means we all have to be involved in the democratic process. And, I think a lot of us think that that means that we vote and it ends there. But when the Department of Health or any government department on any policy that impacts you does a roadshow or rolls out that they have a draft regulation or that they want to intervene, right to your government department, tell them your thoughts on the issue. You'll see on their website, it's usually very accessible, that there will be an explainer of what the specific policy is, and just share your personal experience. The Department of Health specifically has a really good track record of listening to those public submissions, reacting to them and getting a sense of, what the public want. And really, as the Healthy Living Alliance, when we advocate for healthy food policy, one of the major obstacles is showing that we also represent the will of the people. So if we can have members of the public who are interested, writing a 2 sentences saying, my mom has diabetes, and she struggles to identify what's healthy or not, that goes a long way in signaling to the Department of Health that when they introduce a regulation, that it's backed by the public and that it's then discharging the constitutional duty towards people.
And what are your hopes for the future of the food system in the country? And how can our viewers also contribute to this positive change that we're speaking about now?
I think the number one intervention we want to see in South Africa is having less ultra-processed products. If we don't see that, I think we're going to see incredible rises, more rise, actually, I should say, in cancer, in heart disease. We're going to see people that we know and love dying earlier and earlier. So we need to restrict that. And the way as South Africans that we ensure that the government hears us is to actually make sure that there's a demand for locally produced healthy goods. So that means purchasing local goods. It's a really great way to start, but also just supporting any kind of health intervention. Food policy doesn't always feel like a sexy intervention. And it's pretty boring to talk about what's being placed on the pack of your food. until, your doctor tells you have high blood pressure and you need to reduce something called sodium, and then you're very confused. And then these kinds of interventions are incredibly helpful to firstly ensure that we regulate the correct categories of goods, but then after it's regulated, that you can exercise your agency fully and have all of the information to make the correct choices for you and your family.